All right, so let's go over how to add a element to an array. And this is kind of like a tricky question because there's an obvious way to do it when you learn push function, but you don't want to do it that way because it's going to mess up your previous data structure. It's going to change things. And sometimes you don't want your previous data structure to be mutated or changed because it's like object oriented principles. Number one, rule number one, right? You have, like the code that you apply, you want that to only apply to the class or function that you're using. It's kind of following object oriented principles, which we'll talk about later on the channel. All right, so let's do it. Let's give an example. So like, all right, so let's do it the bad way first. Well, the not so, the way that's you kind of don't want to just answer an interview. So if we do like const append, let's call the name of this array append, and we want to say equals to array dash element. So what did I just do here? This is the creation of an arrow function. So boom, this is a function, arrow function. We have two arguments. Those two arguments are arbitrary, randomly picked characters, ARR and element. So inside of this function, what we want to do is we want to say array.push. And dot push is a JavaScript function, which is going to push this, whatever we enter when we call this append function, wherever we enter here for our second character, we're going to push that to that element. So let's go return array and let's do console.log append. Let's do console.log append. Okay, so in the console.log append, what we want to do, we want to pass an array. So an array is just in brackets. So we want to do like 1-2. And then let's do another element. So let's save, Control Alt N, a nice spiffy plugin I have here, and we see that we successfully added an element to that array. This was an array with brackets 1, 2, and we just push 3 into that at the end, right? And you know, you would think, hey, I did it, I'm done with this interview question. I aced it, I passed it. But what happens is when you're in a larger database of code, what happens if you have an object or a data structure, you don't, that's not an ideal situation because now you're changing things that you might not necessarily didn't mean to change. All right, so let me show you, let's just kind of give an example. So if I copy this, so let's say if I copy this and let me just keep that there so you can see. And let's say if I go const um, number, this is going to be another array. And I'm going to say 1-2. So now if I get rid of that, right? So let's say if I do const, and let's make a new array. So let's say new numbers, and let's call the append function. And so let's take this array we just made, numbers. Okay, so and let's pass 3 through it. So what's going to happen is that this is going to take this array, which is 1 and 2, and it's going to we're calling this function, which is going to take these two arguments, which is numbers and 3 respectively in their places, and we're going to push 3 to the numbers array. This was going to happen. So we do, did I spell it right? Yeah. There we go. So we come here and do console dot log and new numbers. So we come here and we console.log new numbers. What do you think is going to happen? Control Alt N. So we see what happened is that we successfully pushed numbers to this new numbers, right? So, okay, cool, that's fine. Well, let's console log numbers. So console.log numbers. All right. Okay, let me save. So we understand new numbers, right? That's the new numbers variable. But what about numbers? Because as you can see here, we never modified numbers. Numbers should still be this because we didn't modify it. Only thing we did with numbers is that we had a new um, a new variable, and we put numbers through this append function. So what happens? You see that numbers was modified somehow, some way. How did that happen? That happened because when we run the push function, when we ran the push function on this array, which we passed through, which was numbers, which was array with two numbers, when we ran a push function on that, it modified it. So that's not something you typically want to do. So what do you want to do? Let's see here. All right, let me copy this so you can kind of still see it. And let me come here. Let me show you the ideal situation. Let me clear that out. Let me save this. All right, so the ideal situation, what we want to do is we want to use a spreader. Let me show you what that looks like in JavaScript. So we want to do, instead of using array.push, let's just return an array because an array is in brackets. And let's take this first argument is ARR, right? ARR, okay, this is an array. But what we want to do is we want to take that array and we want to go dot, dot, dot. And what that is, this operator right here in JavaScript is a spreader. And what it does is it takes this array and spreads the elements in this array into a new inside of an array. So basically, we're just basically creating an exact copy of that array. But when we spread all of this out inside of these brackets, which we're spreading all of these numbers or characters that's inside of this array that we're going to call not numbers, but this one right here inside of that bracket. Let's go ahead and add L in there. I'm sorry. Let's go ahead and add L in there. So theoretically, what we're doing, let me just separate that so I keep confusing myself. So we want to say const append. Okay, this is a function. And we're going to say, hey, let's take these two arguments. We don't know exactly what these are going to be. It's going to be an array, RR, and it's going to be an element. It's arbitrarily, these two things can be anything. But when we run this function, instead of pushing it, let's just spread all the elements out by those three dot dot dots. We're going to take any element in here. So when we call this append right here and we pass these numbers to it, we're taking these two numbers and we're going to spread them out inside of these brackets, which we're spreading them out inside of this array. So all we're doing is we're creating a new array. Does that make sense? And we're going to go ahead and say comma L. So whatever the second one, we're just going to add it to it. So what do you think is going to happen? If we save it, Control Alt N, we see that it did not modify the pre-existing array. We see it didn't change it. So this is kind of what you would want when you're writing code and you're focusing on, okay, object-oriented principles. I'm not trying to explain object-oriented principles, is kind of why I'm hesitating here, but you don't want to typically change a data structure or anything if you don't mean to, because what happens is when you add code or you add more features to your application, things are going to break, it's going to get more bugs. So that's why typically you want to use a spreader, which is that dot 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 in front of the array. So we added that 3 to the end. So say if we want to add that 3 to the beginning, we would just come here, we would take that array and run dot 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 on it, and we would just say we would just say L. Yep, just like that. Here, let me clear that out. So we see, no, I'm not cleared out. Control Alt N. So you see that 3 is at the beginning. So you see how the power when you're faced in like an interview situation where they say, hey, let's add an array to the end or add an array to the beginning. You can see the spreader and the value of it. So I hope I explained that clearly. That's it of today's video. Thanks for watching.